Okay, so hello to all of our viewers, and I want to thank you for joining us. This will be the first of many series into the book Delusion by Irene Greene Murphy, and I have the book here. She is the author of this book called Delusion, a Drug of Choice. And right now we're just going to talk a little bit about her story, and then we'll have some more videos that will actually dig in and get into her book. So if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, make sure that you subscribe to her page. Make sure you like the page so you don't miss the videos coming up, because when I tell you you are in for a treat, you are in for a treat. So let's welcome Irene. She's a licensed clinical social worker, as well as a licensed addiction and drug counselor. She's the author, again, of Delusion, a Drug of Choice. She's the owner of Help the Self. That's a private practice in Maine, which also specializes in neurofeedback. So to begin, I know we will get into each chapter, Irene, later on in our video series, but you have a chapter 3 in your book, and it's titled My Story. So what I'd like you to do right now is just tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a little look into your story.
Well, hi there, everybody. Again, my name is Irene. A little bit about myself. Well, let's start off with, I've been a clinician for over 46 years, and I cannot believe it, and I love it. It is a vocation. It's not a job. It's something that comes from my heart, and it comes from probably my story. I am this little crazy Italian lady from New Jersey and grew up in a very ethnic-oriented Italian culture. And a lot of dynamics of growing up in that family has made me strong in who I am, and also made me explore a lot of things that was a real motivator to my book, Delusion, a Drug of Choice. So my story starts off with that my family, I am a first-generation Italian. Half of my family, my mother comes directly from Sicily. My father is a first-generation Italian. And we lived in a little ethnic neighborhood growing up in 1950, right through the 70s. And that really gave us a lot of security and bonding. However, my family, in a lot of senses, had very, I don't want to say dysfunctional, but I will. Okay. Very, very, number one, they were culturally motivated. Number two, I think they were motivated just from their own stories and their own backgrounds. And a little bit about that. My mom was one of 9. She was a World War II child. She was 12 in the middle of World War II, where she was in bomb shelters and everything was crumbling around her. My father was at that time in the service in the Korean War, and they met up there. My father came from Long Branch, where I grew up. Okay, and he came from a first generation Italian family trying to make it in America. So with those dynamics going on, my mother and father met in this like ideal war bride kind of situation. And really, we're both very dependent persons. And I talk a lot in the book later on about triangulation and birth order. Well, my dad was a firstborn. My mom was almost the baby. That set up this dynamic between the two of them, which created a lot of dependency issues, which neither of them could meet for each other, which created a lot of disappointment between them, which created a lot of conflict. So I saw a lot of conflict going on between my parents. Sometimes it was violent, but it was not violent in the sense that there was any really physical abuse to each other, except around me. Tables broken, chairs broken, things like that. So in my family, I was more or less the firstborn and very much parentified. Okay. And because the dynamic between my mother and father broke down as I grew up in that family, my father was a very positive, big influence to me because my mother came from that post-traumatic stress background where a lot of anxiety and a lot of negativity came out, where my father even was an extremely resilient man. He himself was molested as a child. There was a lot that went on for my dad, but his resilience and his desire for self-help and moving beyond that was just amazing. And I am blessed that he passed that on to me. Okay. My mother passed on her strength because my mother, coming to a new country, was not afraid to work, was not afraid to stand on her own 2 feet. Unfortunately, I think even though she could do that, she felt abandoned in some ways because she was the child. So, you pick up on all this when you're a child. Okay. And you develop that, and that influences your reactions to things. I know one of the things that in seeing a lot of that behavior in my family and in my culture, it's either internalize emotion or react to emotion. You're either happy or you're angry. There is no other way to look at it. And, growing up, it was a real struggle to really be able to identify anything else but that. And again, in the book, I talk about all those other ways of being able to finally come out of that. So my story says that based on those factors and being the firstborn and then being parentified, I was more or less put in this role of a parentified child, what we call a parentified child. So if you look at family systems work, you'll have the parent hierarchy, then you have the child hierarchy. And when that gets skewed is when dysfunctional dynamics happen. So instead of it being my mother and father and me and my sister, it became this triangle of me, my mother and father, my sister, and then my sister would get triangled in with my mother and my father. We would do this triangulation. So I, in many ways, was my sister's mother. I was my father's confidant, and I was my mother's co-parent. Okay, so a lot of that happened through my childhood. However, we talk about a resiliency factor. Guardian angels in my life came into my world, which helped me see a lot of hope and lots of positivity and helped me separate from the negativity. My father would be amazing with stories, when things would come up and when he was in this good frame of mind. Matter of fact, a lot of my type of therapy that I work really comes down to my dad's beatnik days when he would go into the city and he would come home, bring home these books. And some of you may know these books. It's called The Games People Play. It's a transactional analysis. It was the beginning of pop culture self-help back in the late 60s, early 70s. So my father and I would have these intellectual conversations, and he always would give me these words of wisdoms as I would go through my childhood, which I think was my saving grace, was my total saving grace.
So it sounds like you picked up a lot of that from your father.
I did.
Carried a lot of that into your adulthood.
Oh, I did. And there's his stories in the back of my head. And eventually that's the next book. The next book is Just Saying is the title. And it's going to be all these stories my father did tell me. Okay. That helped me get through adolescence and helped me get through a lot of parts of my life. But that whole issue of triangulation and parentification really gave me a skewed belief. And this talks about delusion, right? Because when you're in your childhood, your environment builds up your core beliefs. And then you start basing your activity and your thoughts on these core beliefs. So my core beliefs came out of that chaotic background, came the way that you're on your own. How to handle being disappointed is to just not need anybody, depend on yourself. Okay. And at a very young age, I was doing it. I have a vision of me being 4 and being outside playing in a little yellow dress and just playing in the outside while I'm looking up and seeing this dark window and they're out there, but I'm here and I'm just playing. So there were a lot of ways at which, and again, I think my mentors, people at school was my escape. It gave me my sense of control. Okay. So at a very young age in my family system, being parentified really is not all bad, okay? Because being parentified means that at a very young age, I learned to be responsible. I learned to be self-sufficient. And how it worked for me was I learned there is hope. I just have to do something and it's going to happen, So that, actually as a young teen, I was just telling somebody this story this morning, that I was back in, what's that movie? West Side Story, back in the 60s when they had all the, so I was in a little West Side Stories kind of situation when I was in my teens. We had a little Italian gang called the King Crown and the Queen Crown. And there's about 65 of us in this group. Okay. And we were kind of protecting our turf and we were in that situation. But I had said to my friend that, it was fun. It was like creating your own family, right? In a way, but, it wasn't violent at the time. It was like maybe beating people up, but not really with weapons or killing or anything like that. Actually it was a subgroup of the Christian Youth Association that we used to all go to a meet, but then go off and do our own thing. But I remember the day that it did get violent. that someone started something and bought brass knuckles. And I looked and I went, I got too much going for me. I want to go to college. I don't want any of this. I don't want any of this to interfere with me moving forward with my life. And I remember that was the moment where I pulled away. So sometimes being parentified, being responsible and thinking about control really makes you stop and think about, are you acting or reacting to a situation? And I remember removing myself and pulling myself away from that. That was the beginning of me just focusing on my studies and moving forward. But in the book, what I talk about a lot in my story is that you are molded by your family history. And there becomes these beliefs that you start to just automatic do reactive behaviors on. And in my history, what I learned, especially because of triangulation, which I talk a lot about, that, that you get caught in these dynamics. I was caught in this dynamic between my mother and father. My sister was caught in the dynamic between my mother and father, but in a different way. She was like triangled in with my mother. I was triangled in with my father. So what ended up with my mother and my sister was very different than what ended up with my father and I. Okay, which is a whole nother story. But really what you look at is, now that you know that, how are those behaviors strengths and how are those behaviors challenges? So some of what came out of that is my need for perfection, which came out of my need for control. Okay, everything had to be just right because there was so much chaos. So I've had perfection, I can limit chaos. If I have control, I avoid disappointment. Okay. So what I did is I built this whole world around that, and I thought I was great. I mean, I had a very successful private practice, 2 starlight children. I had the white picket fence syndrome that I grew up with Ozzie and Harriet. but it really wasn't, in my gut of heart of hearts, I wasn't being true to myself. Mm-hmm. And I had to have the courage. And I was 39 when I woke up and was working with a client and realized, oh my goodness, I need to practice what I'm preaching. I need to be able to be true to myself and see how I'm reacting in my life, and realize that a lot of my discontent, whether it's in my marriage or in what I'm doing, isn't just about the other person, but it's about these habits that I'm doing, that if I want to be true to myself and happy, I need to have the courage to face and change. And that was the motivation for Delusion of Drug of Choice. Delusion of Drug of Choice, this book was based on my being able to have 15 years of journaling of my life come together and make me see the patterns. And when I saw the patterns, I started using the tools I was giving the others to live more productive and more honestly with myself. And instead of reacting to feelings of disappointment or reacting to feelings of insecurity, I stopped, I thought, I broke it down, and I responded to it.
That's amazing.
And that was the key. And that has been the crust of what I've been trying to pass on to everybody that I have the blessed right to be able to work with.
That's amazing. I just have a quick question for you that probably our viewers are wondering as well, because I think a lot of times we talk about maybe the light bulb that maybe goes off in our head in life and gets us to that place where we're like, wait, I don't want this for myself anymore. And I know that you work a lot with the way that we think and our thought process and things like that. So could you talk to us a little bit more about how that moment you said, wait, I have to practice what I preach? Could you talk to us a little bit more about what was happening with your thoughts that got you to just do that?
So in that moment, when I was in my late 30s, at the time, I was struggling with my marriage. My husband, really nice man, but he was definitely in the birth order. He was the young child. Okay. And had a lot of dependency issues. And earlier that didn't bother me because my need for control and taking over was great because he let me take over everything. But as I started hitting in my late 30s, it was like I was feeling like I was handling everything alone. And then both our sets of parents were all coming down with medical issues. They were hitting that magical 60 age that I'm hitting right now. And all starting to break down medical issues. So I was caretaking them. I was running a business. My kids were starting to hit late elementary school age. Okay. So all this was coming at me and I wasn't doing self-care. One day I looked in the mirror and I was overweight. And I was starting to be not nice verbally to my husband. And flashes of my mother and my father's dynamics started coming to me. And that's when I said, I am not doing that. I am not reliving that story. I refuse to do that. I do not want to end up like my mother, unhappy and feeling like she has to stay, but sacrifice herself and not take care of herself. That was my aha moment, when I was so overwhelmed with caretaking and taking care of others and not taking care of myself, that I finally had the courage to go, whoa, this is what's going on. That is not who you are.
That's amazing insight. I really do thank you for sharing that with us. And for any of you viewers, again, we're going to get into a series of Irene's book. It is just tremendous. It's so eye-opening. Could you tell us, Irene, how anyone who can obtain a copy of your book that may want to get it before we finish the rest of our series?
Sure. There's two ways you can get the book. It is on Amazon, I think, still now. So you can go on Amazon and you can purchase it through Amazon. The other way of purchasing the book is to contact me at thoughts, THOUGHTS 282 at gmail.com, and leave me your address, your name, and the book is $15. And you can either send me the money through a credit card or a debit card, okay? Or you can mail me a check for $15 to P.O. Box 66, Seal Cove, Maine, 04674, and then I will be sending you the book that way. Or you could contact me at 207-460-6605 and request a copy in a text, and I'd be able to give you instructions on the text.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So get the book if you don't have the book, but follow, subscribe to her YouTube channel, subscribe on her Facebook. Again, she has amazing insight that we all could really benefit from, and you don't want to miss the videos that are going to be coming up next. I do appreciate your time, Miss Irene Greene, and I cannot wait. The first chapter of her book is titled, I skipped over my page, but I believe it's titled Delusions in Everyday Life. And we're going to get into that in our next video, delusions and how we are utilizing those in our everyday life. So again, thank you for your time, and I can't wait to dig into your book. Do you have any final words for us?
No, thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to continuing our discussions and sharing my perspective with you all, because I learn with you. So thank you very much.